right, so last week we talked about signal flow. I'm gonna let y'all tell me what we talked about for signal flow. What is it? What's the first thing? Source or microphone?
Input, microphone, source.
All right. What's next?
Mixer.
All right. Josh, what's next?
Processing.
All right.
Amplifiers.
Amp. And
Speakers.
speaker. All right, this is what we talked about last week was microphones. We went into all the different condenser, dynamic, the different pickup patterns, frequency responses, all those things that we talked about last week. So I brought a mic, that mic that I was telling y'all about, just to demonstrate how a microphone picks up the sound. This is the microphone I was telling you that we got just for the class. So I'll just demonstrate it real quick before we get started. So this has a little rotating dial. And you can see on the rotating dial, you can see on the rotating dial that it gives you basically pickup patterns. You see how they look a little bit different? That's the same as you find in the specifications when you're looking at individual microphones. So this one just happens to give you the ability to vary the direction of it. All right, so if I have it in a standard cardioid, this is the cardioid pattern. This is the one I told y'all is the most popular last week. So if I'm in a standard cardioid pattern, check 1, 2. I'm going to kind of back away from that speaker a little bit. So I'm talking in the microphone. As I get out of the direction, you can see it goes away. You don't hear me in that speaker much at all. As I come back in, check 1, 2. So it's giving me the rejection in that heart-shaped pattern like we talked about. Check, 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 1, 2, check 1, 2, 3, 4. Got it? All right, now that's a cardioid. That's your most popular pattern. If we go to a wider cardioid, this is a little bit different, wider one. Check, 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 check. See, I've got a little bit. You can even hear it on the side address a little bit. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Still got rejection in the back. So this would be, that gives me that rejection with that if that speaker was right there. All right. Now I'll go to omnidirectional, which this means is picking up all the way around. Check, 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 check 1, 2. If I get over here by the speaker, okay. So by having the wrong element, by having the wrong pickup pattern, you can hear what it's doing. If I roll this, you see that? It's not changing anything as far as the level of the microphone. All I'm doing is rejecting it from over there. Okay? So that's the difference in these microphones. When you are looking at something at a church or whatever, you want to make sure that you have something that's not picking up sound from everywhere. Okay? And again, we talked about omnidirectional is good for like conference room mics, for the small head warmers. We were talking about that for theater, stuff like that is where you're going to see the omnidirectional stuff. All right, so it's just a great way to demonstrate how pickup patterns work. All right, this is a condenser microphone, so as I'm talking, you can hear me. If I turn off the phantom power, you're going to hear it go away. Okay, so there's not going to nothing's going to happen without the phantom power on. Turn it back on, good to go. All right, condenser mic. Now, also, you'll notice how sensitive that mic was. If I plug in this microphone, which I believe is just a dynamic mic, I just grabbed this out of that bucket. Check, 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 check. See how it's not near as sensitive? So to get the sensitivity level up, I've got to bring my gain up. Check 1, 2. So you can see how much more sensitive this kind of mic is than a regular dynamic mic. Okay? So that's a good demonstration of that. Any questions about that? I don't want to keep beating a dead horse with the microphones because I think we went over it pretty well last week. Good to go? Good to go.
And you can't treat these as roughly as you can those.
Right. Those are definitely more fragile, so you got to be more careful, and typically with a condenser mic.
Pretty good on microphones.
Okay.
I was selling them for so long that I
Right.
kind of know a little bit
In the retail, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's be done with microphones. Let's move on to the mixer. Okay. So first question is, what is a mixer? I think it's pretty obvious. It takes multiple inputs, it mixes them and routes them and does different things, and then it buses them out through different outputs. Okay? What is the confusing part about mixers, and what a lot of people have to just grasp, is that not only are there multiple inputs, there's multiple outputs. Very simple mixers have maybe 5 or 6 channels in and maybe 1 or 2 channels out. Okay, or just a stereo left and right out, or just a mono out. Typically what you're going to be running into in like a church scenario or something like that is a mixer like this where you've got multiple, 16, 24, 32 channels of mix. So what I want to do is I want to take the mixer and I want to break it down by channel. Okay? So when you think of a mixer, as intimidating as all this looks when you first look at it, if you learn what one of these strips does, essentially one channel, you just multiply that by 32, you understand a lot of the board. Okay, so we'll spend a lot of time breaking down one channel on the mixer, probably a couple of weeks just breaking down a channel. Okay, maybe not quite that long. But anyway, so what I want to do is I want to start by, again, like we talked about before, I want you to know what every single button on this does. Because even though you go into another church and they may have a Mackie version of a mixer as opposed to a Yamaha, these functions are all still the same. They may be called a little bit differently or they may show up in a little bit different place. But it's like I tell people in the past when I'm teaching this, if you know how to drive a car, you know what a blinker does, you'll figure out where the blinker is, right? You know what windshield wipers do, you'll figure out how to turn them on. So it's getting past the fear of not being able to figure out how to use it. Is just once you know how it's supposed to work, you'll find where it is on the board, okay? So that's kind of what I want to do with this strip is give you the confidence to be able to walk in to a mixing board, any mixing board, and whether it be digital or analog, and find the information that you need to be able to change stuff. Okay? All right, so let's start. So with a mixer, your inputs are typically going to be on the back of the mixer or on the top of the mixer. You're going to use a standard XLR for microphones. Anytime you can use an XLR, do use an XLR, in my opinion, because it's just the better connection. You're going to come in, you're going to plug that in, pick a channel, okay? Now, what channel am I in? Did I plug in the right channel? 19, yes. Okay, there's a couple things you're going to see on a mixer. The most important thing that you're going to find on a mixer when you're setting anything up or plugging in anything is your gain or your trim. It is the lifeblood of a mixer. So I'm going to erase this and we're going to.
So the trim's the same thing as the gain?
That's exactly right.
different.
Yep. You're going to see it called trim or you're going to see it called gain, and just know that they're pretty much the same thing. So if I'm looking at a mixer, I've got my first knob here, which is gain. Okay. What the gain does is the gain sets the amount of level coming into the mixer. So it has nothing to do with what's going out. It sets the level coming in. So if you turn it up, the net result is that it is louder coming out. But all the gain's doing is adjusting the input. That's why it's on usually the top of the channel strip. That's all it's adjusting is the input level. The reason that the gain is so important is that if you don't have it set right, everything past it can sound like crap. Okay? So if you don't get this set right, you're fighting battles all over the place that you should have had right from the very beginning. Okay? There's a particular way to set up gain on a microphone, or really anything coming into the board, and I'm going to walk you through those steps of how to set up a gain properly. So if I plug in a microphone for the first time, I would want my gain to be turned all the way down. I start it all the way down. Okay? I'm going to start the process here. Here's the process. Plug in a microphone. Turn the gain all the way down. Bring your fader, your output fader. This is your output fader. This is how much volume is sent to the speaker. Set it at 0.
Or
So
unity.
gain all the way down and set the fader to 0, which, as Harvey pointed out, is also called unity. Okay, so anytime you see the word unity, thank you for mentioning that, Harvey. Anytime you see the name unity in our industry, that means 0. So unity means you're not boosting it, you're not cutting it, you're strictly just passing through the audio. Does that make sense? So on a lot of boards, you'll notice unity is a good ways up. You know, you're like, wait, that seems like I'm like, almost to the top. No, that's actually at 0, and then you're just attenuating from there. So typically you're attenuating more than you're boosting on a fader, output fader. Okay, so you set the output to unity. I'm going to set my main output to unity. Okay, it's at 0. So essentially what I've done is I've set the outputs to where what I'm hearing is exactly what I'm giving it on the input side. Does that make sense? So I'm hearing essentially the pure sound coming through. As a side note, you also want to make sure that your EQs are flat. We'll talk about EQs in a minute, but we want to make sure that the EQs are flat, and I'll explain what that means in just a minute. So I've plugged in my microphone, I've set my output fader to 0. I've set my master fader to 0. And now I'm ready to actually test the mic, maybe do a sound check, get somebody to, if it's a guitar, get somebody to play the guitar, do whatever they're going to do. So I grab the mic, do a testing 1, 2. So I bring up my gain, check, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until I get a good level. There's one more step to this that I'm going to tell you about in just a second, but what I'm looking for here is just a good, clean level, a level of sound coming out. You also can use a meter over here. There is a button called PFL, which I have pressed in right now. PFL stands for Pre-Fade Listener, and we'll probably go into that a little bit more as we get down the board. But it's important to talk about while we're talking about gain, because what it does, what a Pre-Fade Listener does, is it allows you to see just that channel metered over here. So if I didn't have that pressed, all I can see as far as the meter goes is just the main output. When I press that, I can now see, check, check, I can see the level coming in. So if I was doing this mic, I would do that. If I was doing this mic, I would have this one. Obviously, you're not going to see anything because I'm not doing anything in that mic. So as you're setting up an input on a mixer, that PFL is an important tool to be able to just view a meter. Is the meter the end all? No. Okay? Sometimes you may not get a whole lot of reading over here, but you're blowing it out in the speakers. You're going to always have these variables. The main thing you're trying to do with the meter is make sure that you're not overdriving the input. So in this case, say I had forgotten to turn my master up enough, and I'm trying to get this loud enough. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now it's good and loud. All right, so now if I PFL it, you can't see this, but I am peaking 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's the reason that you have to be careful, because if this were down, if you could accidentally be overdriving this input. 1, you see it's all distorting red, and you wouldn't know it. And you can have extreme measures of this. You could have it really distorted. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you go to your carnivals and you give them out the animals and stuff like that. This is what all their microphones sound like. They're always overdriving them because they're trying to make them louder and they don't really know how to set things up. So many times blown speakers are not blown speakers. Many times blown speakers actually sound like blown speakers because the inputs are overdriven. Okay? I see this all the time. All the time. And the reason is because over time, people maybe they've switched out to a different mic, and maybe it was a different singer that sang really far away, and now somebody sings really close, and so they're turning them down here, but they're not adjusting them here. So there's plenty of things over the years that can cause channels to do that. It's very, very common when I go into a church mixing a praise team for the first time, and the way they have it set up, I'm looking and I'm seeing red, all over the place. Just because that's, over time, that's what happens. So to set this up properly, go back, put this at 0, put this at 0, or at unity, have my PFL meter, bring it up till I get some nice clean audio. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check 1, 2. I can see that's nice and clean. At that point, I can move on. So that's set up as far as the input level goes. You may have to tweak it. You may have to turn it up. You may have to turn it down. People start actually using the microphone. They get more, a testing 1, 2 is a lot different than in the middle of a song when things are rocking and rolling. This is not the end all. It's just the way you start. If you don't start this way, then, and you also always make sure that this is the first thing you do, right? Mm-hmm. Am I mixing monitors or anything else before I set this up? No. Am I setting up a record feed before I set this up? Okay, you got to get this right first, because the problem is that this affects everything past it. So again, and I'm always I just tell you the common problems I run into because it's just practical things. You go into a church and worship is happening or whatever. You go out into the lobby speakers are distorted as all get out. Okay, it's because things have been building in here. They've been working the gain in the church and not starting fresh. So now everything's distorting out there. Okay, so anytime you make a change with a gain, your thought has to be, what have I just done? What did I just do? Because if you change the gain on this microphone, I may have turned it up in the recording. I may have turned it up in 3 monitors on stage that are now going to feed back because it's too loud on the stage. Your people are going to start hollering at you, why is this piano so loud? But you had turned up the gain to make it louder in the house, and you didn't think about what you had done to everybody else that's involved in the whole thing. So you can wreck a family by messing with the gain too much. So make sure you get that set. That doesn't mean you're not going to change it in the mix. Doesn't mean you're not going to have to play with it every now and then, but you get that set up correctly. Any questions about that? Okay. That's a 101 on gain. Just that alone would make people's lives running soundboards much better if they knew how to set it up from the very beginning. Okay. But so many people are just kind of walking into these and volunteering and just trying to make it work that that little bit of knowledge just never got passed down to them. All right, right beside the gain on most mixers, not all mixers, most mixers, you're going to see a button called pad. It's a little button called pad.
You said that's next to gain, or?
It's right, in this case it's right above it. It could be right below it, it could be right beside it. Again, where it shows up could be different places. And then you got this little button that's underneath it called HP, which stands for high pass. All right, what does a pad do? What pad does is it knocks down the volume before it gets into the mixer, essentially before it hits the preamp. So if I have a really hot source, like a cell phone or something like that, anything typically, just FYI, anything typically that you could plug headphones into and listen with headphones, if you take that type of device and you plug it into a mixer, expect it to be hot, right? Because it's typically designed to drive headphones. So you want to make sure that you're using caution anytime you're plugging that into a mixer, or whether it be a computer output, whether it be an iPhone, an iPad, or anything like that. The pad control, the pad button is there to allow you to turn down the volume before it gets into the mixer. And I don't have a cable with me to demonstrate that, or my adapter, but you.
Yeah, a lot of times when I'm testing stuff with a phone or something like that,
Yeah.
You don't
I just go ahead
have.
and turn everything
Oh,
down.
you need to
across
pour
the
this,
board.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Turn the speakers down.
Yep.
The mixer, the phone, or whatever.
And that's the best practice to do because it can get you,
Yeah.
and it can get you bad. Where mine is.
There's an XLR to 4-inch or 8-inch up there.
I think I can use this one. You got music playing? Should I turn all the way up? Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see it coming in. Okay, so let me turn this on. Let's bring some sound in. Sorry. Okay. That's with the gain all the way down. At Unity, that's as loud as that was. It's gonna be loud. That's with the gain all the way down. You see the problem? Okay, so now what I can do is I can press this pad button, and that knocks the volume down, and it gives me control. All right, now that recording sounds a little bit weird because I'm using the wrong cable. But anyway, so does that make sense? So if you plug that in, it'll distort before you get to do anything with it. The argument is you could turn it down on your phone and not be overdriving it. The reality is a lot of people have their phones all the way up. They're going to plug it in, and it's just going to be a disaster. So you want to have a pad engaged to make sure that you have the room to be able to adjust the volume like you need to. It's just like it's just pouring in way too much sound, and there's nothing you can't control it. Okay.
Does pad stand for something?
Just reducing the volume. I don't know if there's an acronym for pad.
Okay.
But it reduces the volume typically about 20 dB. So, and a lot of times you may not see it called pad, by the way. A lot of times you may see just a marker or something that looks like this. Okay? But just know that's what it is. Even if it doesn't say pad, it's saying minus 20 dB. So examples of that would again be phones, computers, iPads. Sometimes it could be if going like directly from a keyboard directly into here. Some people will run them out of their headphone jack on a keyboard. You can imagine that's really hot output because they're again trying to drive headphones typically with it. Okay. Now, if you are in a church situation or in a school or whatever, and you see a pad engaged, you need to ask yourself why. Okay? Many times I'll go in to look at scenarios and they will have like microphones padded. Would you ever want to pad a microphone? No. Okay? So you want to, and you can't just disengage it because you're liable to just get all kind of feedback. You got to think it through, turn your volume down, turn the channel off, and then turn the gain down, remove the pad, and then start over. Okay? But I think some people, because a microphone, it will turn the volume down so much it doesn't even work essentially. I think some people use it as like a mute switch, is what I've run into. Or they get Johnny sings one week and then Susie sings another week, and they just use that to toggle between two different input levels. So for instance, if I'm talking in this mic right now and I pad it, it's almost like the microphone's off because I've taken it down 20 dB. I probably can't even get it high enough to, all the way up, it barely works. But if I release that right now,
It's gonna blow up the wire.
okay, so that's why you don't want to just come in and start removing pads without thinking through what you're doing. All right, so we're not padding microphones. We are padding any electronic devices and things like that. Okay? All right, high pass. High pass filter, what does that do? Super important. A high pass filter cuts off the low frequencies coming into the mixer. Okay? So if you can hear this microphone kind of rumbling around and stuff. If I have a microphone that has handling noise, or it's getting, maybe I'm outside and I'm getting some of that low wind noise into the microphone, a high pass basically cuts off low frequencies and doesn't allow them to pass into the mixer. So a lot of times you'll see a symbol like this right by a high pass. I don't know if this one has that or not. Yeah, it does. Okay, and then you'll see something like this, like that. And in our case, it says 80. What you're seeing with that little line drawing there is you're seeing a representation of what we talked about last week of that 31 band of the 20. Remember 20 hertz, the 20 kilohertz when we were talking about frequency response. That's about. I just did the Z like backwards. All right. So if this was flat, remember we talked about that. What this is doing, what that's representing, is it's cutting off these low frequencies here. You see how that looks now? And what they're saying is that this, where it's cutting this off, is 80 hertz. So it's not letting anything pass below 80 hertz essentially into the mixer. Why is that important? If I'm dealing with a singer that's singing, obviously doing their thing, how many singers do you think goes below 80 hertz? I'll tell you. Not.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not in that range typically. Typically they're at 125 hertz and up as far as the range of what they're getting. So why do I want these super low frequencies? Why would I want that coming through a microphone if I don't need it? That's why they give you that, because if it's a microphone, typically you don't need those low frequencies. If it's a piano, yes.
Right.
Bass, yes. Okay, so a lot of other things you do want those low frequencies to come into the mixer. It's just with microphones you typically don't. It cleans up your mix. It also helps you prevent feedback. I don't know if I can demonstrate it here, but I can try. So if I have this microphone, I don't know if this is low enough. Okay, I just engaged my high pass. That actually worked pretty well. All right, so without the high pass, I'm getting these low frequencies coming through. With my high pass engaged, it cuts that out, so it cleans up the mix, helps reduce feedback. Huge tool, right? Could you imagine if I had all these microphones and none of them had the high pass on it, and all I had to do was engage that, and now I don't have feedback issues. Okay. So basically what I want you to know about that is that you're using on microphones and you don't want other stuff. Okay? Again, a lot of times because they're just buttons that people press, I'll go into a church, they'll have high pass engaged on piano, on the bass guitar, on all these things that you need dynamics on, and then they won't have it engaged on microphones. So make sure you pay attention to that. On digital consoles, this is what's great about digital boards. It is a variable high pass. So a lot of times when you see us setting up a digital console for the first time, we're engaging the high pass, but then we're setting that high pass where we want it to be. Like with a male vocal voice, we'll probably do about 80 to 90 hertz. Female, maybe move that up a little bit, 110, something like that. So you can do a variable bypass. Big benefit of a digital mixer. Here, analog mixers, you basically just have it and you engage it. Where it's set, as far as whether it's 80 to 125 to 100, that's all up to the manufacturer and whatever mixer you happen to be looking at or working with. Okay? Another good example of where that helps is a podium microphone. Make sure you always have that engaged because that takes away some of the rumble of the, flipping your notebooks around and doing the things that'll help knock some of that out. Okay? Questions? Okay, y'all are making me talk a lot. All right, let me erase this. All right, so we know how to set up a mic. We know when to engage a pad. We know when not to engage a pad. We know what a high pass does, and we know when to engage it and when not to engage it. So these are things that you're looking at on that channel strip. So the next thing is your EQ section. So typical setup, I'm just going to draw this out as it looks on here. You're going to have 4 knobs. All right, this is going to be your highs, mids, and your lows. Okay? So let me try to explain this try to explain what's happening by showing you. You know what this is?
Equalizer?
EQ, right? We've all seen them. We've all seen, in the old school when these used to light up and, do all kind of funny things on your old radios. And anyway, okay, so.
I'm not that old.
Yeah, you're not that old. This is, the old stereos had, the EQs, you could see they'd light up. And, yeah. All right, so this is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. This is what I was just talking about earlier. That's the life we live essentially in pro audio. So you can think of it a couple different ways, but I'm going to pull this out again. We've got 20 and 20. I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but you kind of got lows, mids, and highs. Okay, and then kind of like what we talked about last week. There's, you could argue where do lows start. Every manufacturer is going to be a little bit different on how they address it on a board. But anyway, your lows are, let's say 250 below. Okay, your mids are there to maybe 3K. I don't know, and your highs are there all the way up, but typically going to go up to about 10K. All right, so what's happening when I rotate this knob? Because I want to get you past I'm just turning up highs, and it gets a little bit clearer. It gets a little bit brighter or tinier. I want you to kind of take it a step further and think about what's happening. What happens is when I turn up this high, the high frequency here, EQ, essentially I'm boosting this frequency range, okay? So if you can imagine if the mids are flat and the lows are flat, if I turn up the highs, I'm boosting that frequency range, okay? It's not, when I turn up the highs, it's not bringing anything else down, it's not, doing anything else there, it's just boosting this frequency range. Now there's a ton of other things you can think about. You could talk about EQs for 9 weeks and not miss a beat. But the simple way to think about what the highs are doing with that knob is it's taking this group of frequencies, and there's something called a Q width, which is how much it's taking up. So a narrow Q would look something like this, if this were just a Q. A wide Q would look something like this, okay? This is kind of set already by the manufacturer. When we're talking about EQs like this, all you're doing is turning the knob, right? You can't change all these other things. The reason I'm bringing this up is because with an analog mixer, this is all the control I have. I can turn up the highs and that's about it. With a digital mixer, and we're gonna, once we get through all this, we're gonna play with all this on the digital mixer. With a digital mixer, I can go into my highs and I can actually select how narrow, how wide I wanna pull up. I can kind of move it around to what frequency I actually wanna grab. So you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to a digital mixer. In this case, basically I'm turning up the highs, I'm just turning up that group of frequencies. Just think of it that way, without getting too technical. Lows, I'm doing the same thing. That was what I just said here. It's just doing the same thing with lows. Now I want to explain a little bit about mids. And mids is kind of where the magic happens. Most of your, like I was talking about, most vocals, most things that you're mixing fall in that mid range. Okay? So it makes a big difference when you make changes to mids. Now, there's two different types of EQs. There's parametric and there's semi-parametric. Parametric you don't deal with typically on an analog board of this type, size, and stature. You're dealing with what they call a semi-parametric. Okay? So a semi-parametric EQ essentially has two knobs that control the mids. And they do two very different things. Okay? The first knob that you're going to see, you select the frequency. And in your case, this is a blown up version of this. Understand that. Would be 250 hertz to 500 hertz. I think that's what yours is. No, 5K. It's not 500 hertz. 5K, sorry. Okay? So in this particular case, it's 250 to 5K, not 3K. Y'all follow me?
Yeah.
Okay? So that first knob, basically, I rotate it and I select what frequency I want. So it would be 250, maybe 1K, maybe 3K, you know what I'm saying, 3.5. And then this right here is minus 15 and plus 15. So this knob is turning up or turning down whatever frequency I've picked. And this is where a lot of people get a little confused, because if I have this knob at 0, it's not doing anything. And I rotate this. Am I hearing any change?
No.
Because I'm not telling it to boost it or cut it.
Yeah.
If I move it to the right and then I move this wherever I want, I turn it to the right. Now I'm boosting that group of frequencies that I've said I wanted to boost.
And also, you might want to mention, like we were told, sometimes less is more.
Yeah, definitely. That's just an EQ in general. What he just said is just a general thing about EQs is the less you can do, the less you have to do it, the better. If you find yourself doing a lot of EQing, I always tell people go back to the source. Maybe you need to reposition the microphone on a snare drum. Maybe you need to tell the singer they need to sing more into the microphone. Maybe you need to, there's different things. If you're having to EQ super heavy, he's right, because it can sound processed at that point. All right, so that's 255K. So you can imagine if I'm rotating this knob to the right, it's kind of going across this, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm saying I want to boost, if I'm rotating this knob and I want to rotate it to about 1K, I can move it around, get it to what I think is about 1K, and essentially what that's doing is it's boosting that when I turn the knob. It's cutting it, it would be sweeping it out like that. Okay? And a lot of what you're doing with a semi-parametric, a lot of times what I find that I'm doing is I'm cutting frequencies. Because it may sound the room may have a frequency that's real dominant, it sounds kind of nasally or something like that. I find myself cutting frequencies more than I'm boosting them. Now, in a mix, you may need to boost a frequency to kind of bring it out in a mix. So if I'm mixing a band and I've got, I don't know, 4 or 5 singers or whatever, or guitar and all that stuff. If I want to bring something forward in what I would call bring it forward in a mix, make it seem like it's louder. A lot of times you can do that with just minor EQ changes. You can actually bring something out in the mix without even making it louder. Does that make sense? Because it puts them out in front of everybody else. Because you can mix everybody where they kind of sync all together, and then have one person you can EQ a little bit different, and kind of puts them right in front of all the others. And without having a band and doing all this, I mean, that's just kind of practical stuff you would work with to do. But anyway, 250 to 5K minus plus. Let me demonstrate it. Talking to the microphone here, I am flat. Okay, and flat is basically just, I'm not changing anything. So this is my highs. All right, you hear that? Check 1, 2. This is my highs out. Check 1, 2. This is my highs at unity. And typically on a mixer, you'll have almost a notch kind of where you're at 0. So I'm not changing anything. My lows, same thing. Here I am boosting my lows. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Here I am taking my lows out. So now I'm pulling some back. Go back to unity. That's pretty much now flat EQ. Okay. Now with my semi-parametric, if I move this top knob, I'm moving it around like this, you hear no change. And why is that? That's because I told you I was at 0 here, unity. I'm not changing anything. If I move that knob to the right, you can hear now as I move this around, check 1, 2, 3, 4, check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You see how bad I can make that sound and how good I can make that sound and how quickly that happens? You can make a sound system sound horrible with a semi-parametric EQ. So, does that sound good? No, sounds like crap. So, now I'm going to take that and I'm going to turn it back and kind of to the left. So now I'm sweeping frequencies. I can go through here and I can kind of go through and find check, 1, 2, a frequency that I might think sounds good. Brighten it up a little bit, maybe add a little bit of bass, kind of get that radio voice going. AM 750, check 1, 2. So you can kind of find that sweet spot of what you're trying to do. I'm telling you, this right here gets more people in trouble than you can imagine. Because all it takes is that, and this thing sounds like crap. Harsh, horn, sounds like a horn speaker, really bad stuff. But if you don't understand that these two are linked together, then you don't understand that these two are linked together. And I'm telling you, 20-something years of training people in churches, I've had guys that have ran the soundboard and they're like, man, they're making me do this training, but I've been running this board for 20-something years. I think I got it. No problem, let's just do a quick review and I'll be out. And I hit that part and they're like, huh, I never knew those were linked. Okay, so it's a real thing. It really is. So just that is one of those things that when you're talking to customers or whatever, and if ever I'm adjusting that, I always take an extra moment to explain how that works, because that is huge for them down the road and empowering on how they can set their EQs. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. Am I EQing when I don't need to?
No. Right?
Why mess with it if I don't have to? I want to try to make sure I have the right microphone, so I don't have to do that if I can. If it sounds bad, think of other reasons that it could sound bad. Microphone placement, somebody not singing in the mic right, those types of things. Could be speaker placement. All right, that's basically how you work that. I want to explain one super important tool to use in this is feedback elimination. Okay, so you can cause feedback, and I talk about feedback all the time because it's one of your biggest complaints that you're running into, and your challenge that you're trying to figure out is how to get things loud enough without them ringing into the speakers, right? That tool is super helpful when it comes to reducing feedback, whether it be with choir mics or a podium mic or whatever. It's kind of my first go-to is I just jump right into the semi-parametric and start dialing it in. Because feedback kind of falls in these 3 categories, and I'd say they kind of fall where this is. It's either that really low rumble that just sounds like it's coming out of the ground. It's just building and building and building. There's that real weird mid-rangey ring that's just happening the whole time somebody's talking. You're like hearing a ring and you're like, somebody's got to fix that. That's driving me nuts. And then there's just the really high-pitched feedback that everybody's running out of the room, right? All those can be addressed with your EQ. So, for example, I'm going to try to demonstrate this. So this may be a little loud, but all right. Okay, so you hear the feedback, right? I can take my low frequency and I can turn that down. I've solved the feedback. Is it the perfect EQ for the situation? I don't know. I'm trying to solve feedback, right? You got to start. You got to kill that before you can worry about anything else, because that'll run people out of the room. That'll ruin the show. So you make sure you do that. All right, so that was my low frequency. Turn down the volume. Now nobody can hear in the mic. I need more volume. Okay, well, let me turn it back up. Okay, they don't really address it with your EQ like you can here. Okay, once you understand that that's a low frequency, I can go and address it with my EQ. A lot of these feedback issues you can work around. Conversely, you may have issues with that's kind of your mid-range ring. This is the I'm talking and it's ringing type sound. Let's see if I can get it to do it again. Check 1, 2. Y'all hear that ring? Okay. You've heard it before, right? It's annoying. So I can listen to it, kind of find out what it is. In this case, I'm going to cut frequencies and find where it is. Check 1, 2, and get rid of it. Okay. Anytime you're trying to eliminate feedback with a semi-parametric EQ, you're cutting frequencies, you're not boosting them. Because I'm trying to find what frequency is giving me the feedback issue, and I'm cutting it. All right, conversely with high, if you're having a high pitch, turn down the highs. I think y'all get it. I'm not going to burn y'all's ears out. All right. Any questions? I'm trying to think if I missed anything on that. So we went through that pretty quick. The main thing I want y'all to think about is when you're making EQ changes, whether it be you setting up mics in a theater or something like that, when you're making those changes, consciously be thinking about what are you doing in the frequency spectrum, not just that you turn it down and it sounds different. Kind of take it to that next level and kind of think about what you're changing. Because when it comes to time to work a digital mixer, you're going to want to know more about, it's not just a simple high knob and a low knob, it's more to it.
It's a frequency.
Mm-hmm. It's a frequency or a group of frequencies that you're working with.
Oh.
So definitely want you to think about that.
Those digital mixers, they'll show the graph, right? On the
Yeah.
screen, yeah.
Yeah.
So that does make it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to love the digital mixer because it shows a lot more. Like you said, you can see this, and you can just kind of squeeze it and pinch it and move it with your finger and do all these things. But even then, if you don't understand how it's working, you can screw it up just as fast as you make it sound better. I mean, a lot of times when I'm setting up something that either for the first time or trying to fix something, one of the first things I'll do is just flatten out the EQs and start fresh because I have no idea what or why somebody's turned things the way they've turned them. Okay? Does that all make sense? Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to let's move on to one of the biggest challenges that people run into understanding on a mixer is auxiliary sends. Okay, that's the knobs here. That's the next 4 knobs. So I'm going to draw 4 knobs just like on the mixer. Okay. What is an auxiliary send? It's just another output mix. That's all it is. Okay? It does, you can do other things with it. You can actually take an aux send, you can put it through some sort of effects processor, you can put it back into the mixer, you can do all these different things with it. Let me tell you practically how you're going to run into it all the time. It's going to be something plugged into the mixer, there's an aux send output. It's going to be running either to monitors on a stage or a recording, maybe a Facebook Live audio feed, maybe a lobby, okay? It's going to be sending it somewhere. Nowadays, a lot of times back in the older days, I say older days, I mean 10 years ago, a lot of people would use the Aux Send as an effects mix. So you basically, if you look at the back of boards, you're going to see returns. And returns are for if you wanted to send aux out and then return it back into the board, it would add effects to wherever you wanted to turn it up across the mixer. But most mixers either now have a little effects engine built in, like this one does, or it's a digital mixer and all the effects are all built in, okay? But if you go into a digital mixer, you're essentially going to almost an Aux Send when you do the effects. So you're doing kind of the same thing, it's just all built in internally. All right, so if this is a channel here, let's say I take an output to an amp and then to a floor wedge speaker, okay? Let's say this is aux 1. And then I have another one going to another amp. As we know signal flow, I need to have an amp in there, right? I have a speaker. If I have a powered speaker like I do here, could I go straight from the aux out into this?
Mm-hmm.
Right, because the amp's built in, good to go. All right, so I can take a signal out of this board and plug it into any powered speaker, just like I'm doing right now, and it'll work, okay? Now, how does that, all right, so I've got aux 1 and this is aux 2, sorry. So the way a mixer is laid out, let's say this is 5 channels. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right, let's say this is 5 channels. This is channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, channel 5. And you know we're talking about channel strips, not to confuse anybody. We're talking about channel strips. So one of these represents what we just drew right here. So if I have something plugged into aux 1 here, let's say I have something plugged into the input on the mixer, a microphone plugged into channel 1, and I want to send it out of aux 1. I need to turn it up right here, and that would route it out to this speaker that's over here. Let's say I want to turn this microphone up now into aux 2. I would turn it up here because that's aux 2. It goes to that speaker. And so on and so on. So basically what's happening is I can take any input on the mixer and I can route any of these auxiliaries to wherever they're plugged up into.
And that's just controlling the volume at the floor monitors or whatever.
Yep.
Not for the master out.
Yep. And I'll explain that. All right, I'm going to write this out a little bit different. Here's the way I want you to think of this. Let me make this a little bit bigger. See a little bit better. Normally I have a big board, but I don't. Let's just do 3. Let's pretend we have 3 channels. I'm just going to draw this a little bit bigger. Because there's a question you have to ask yourself when you're mixing monitors. We're going to just, what I'm talking about right now is stage monitors on a stage. Imagine a church, imagine there's keyboard players there, there's a guitar player, there's a drummer, and all these different things. Well, when I assign each one of these, I am assigning them for a mix or a person that's going to be listening to that mix. Okay? So let's say aux 1 is drums. Let's say aux 2 is keys. Let's say aux 3 is singers. And let's say aux 4, let's make it pulpit. This would be a pretty standard setup in a church, right? All right, now plugged into the mixer, plugged into the input on the mixer, those look like peaches. Plugged into the input on the mixer is, let's say this is a saxophone, and let's say this is a guitar, and let's say this is a mic. So this is a small little setup where It's a guy playing a guitar, he's singing in a mic, and there's a sax player. We'll just say there's just 3 things here. Obviously, there's going to be more than that with 4 monitor mixes, but for the sake of description. So the thought process that you want to use is what?
Who wants what?
Okay? Who's asking? What are they asking for?
Right.
Because you think of this as an XY axis. Excuse me. Okay? Who's asking? The singer's asking. I'm just making that up. It's the singer talking to me. Who's asking is the singer. What are they asking for? The mic. So I go over here. I can turn this up. And now that changes the volume in their speaker that they're listening to, and they hear more of the microphone going into their monitor mix. If the singer asks for more saxophone, I turn it up here. Once I, you have 2 pieces of paper. Once I establish, here, I'll just take the pad. Once I establish who's asking, this is what's important. That's why you have to use that process. Who's asking, what are they asking for? Because once I establish who's asking, everybody else goes away. So if the guy playing the keyboard is asking, all this other stuff is just crap. I'm not paying attention to anything else other than him. I'm working with him right now. Okay? If the pulpit, the pastor's asking for something, I'm only working with him. Nothing else means anything. And what'll confuse people is let's say we have one that's keys, and then I had a keyboard down here, and the keyboard asks for something, but you go to the keyboard. No, you don't go to the keyboard because they're asking for guitar. Okay, you got to think about that XY axis, but you want to just shut out whatever you're not mixing. So when you're doing live mixing, or you're setting this up at a church or wherever you school or whatever, it doesn't matter if there's 1 mix, if there's 3 mix, if there's 6 mix, if there's 10 mixes. It doesn't matter. You're only working with one at a time. And once you think about that, it makes this a whole heck of a lot easier. But it's easy for me to sit up here and say it. It's a lot harder when you've got 5 people at one time hollering at you. I can't hear this. Can you turn this down? Can you turn that up? So that's where just experience comes into play, and just managing, managing your people. But these are all just mixes. So we've got the main mixer, and then you've got these individual Aux Sends, which are just individual little mixers within the mixer. This right here is what'll get you in trouble, and it's what'll make you money. Because if you can get this right and you can do this right, you're way ahead of most people. Okay, and it's kind of controversial, but I say when people are working, and I've ran sound for churches for 20 years, you better make your people on the stage happy, because that's who's they need the whole experience. They need to hear themselves. They need to be able to worship, and possibly they're writing a check. So you need to make sure they're happy. You got to spend a lot of time making sure that people are on stage happy. Okay? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If I were to take this right now, which I will do, and we'll plug it up into this as a monitor, I'll show you how the monitor mix will work. Let me grab a cable. We have a 1/4 inch to XLR. Male. We keep those over here?
Yeah, they're over there. Where now?
There's one of everything over here. Where it is, this right here.
Yes, that's exactly right.
You grabbed it like 4 times.
I did, I think. All right, so the back of this board, or any console, I see where it says Aux Send 1. Okay? So I'm plugging it into that. And after we get down, y'all can come over here and look at this. But Aux Send 1. I've got Aux Send 1, Aux Send 2, Aux Send 3, Aux Send 4. I'm going to plug it into Aux Send 1. Let me make sure that's turned down in this. Okay. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to plug it into my powered speaker. I'm going to unplug my main output. Okay. I actually need two speakers to demonstrate this a little bit better. But all right, I'm going to plug that in. So I'm coming aux send into this. So right now my main output is not going to do anything because I unplugged it. Okay. Now if I want to put audio into this speaker, I go to my microphone, which is channel 19. I go up, I find aux 1, and I dial it up. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, and now I have sound. Let me turn that up a little bit there. Now I have sound into that speaker.
Or
Okay.
monitor as it would be on stage.
Yeah, that could be a monitor on the stage. Now, if I wanted to, where we had the music plugged in earlier, if I wanted to hear that, I would go to find my music, go up to aux 1, and turn it up there, and I would hear it in that. Okay? So you can imagine, kind of extrapolate it out, if I had 4 of these, then it would just do the exact, you would just do the exact same thing. Okay? So the who's asking, what are they asking for is kind of the holy grail of how to mix, in my opinion, how to mix monitors. Because if you find out who's asking, everybody else doesn't matter. And then you can focus on what are they asking for. And they're going to tell you, turn something down, turn something up, or whatever it takes to get their mix right. There's a couple really important things to consider here. One is, on the Aux Sends, you always have a master. So there's always a master, typically on a normal size board like this, there's a master somewhere. In this case, they're over here on this side. But just like with the main output, you know how I turn that down, everything turns down, right? Well, same thing with here. If I turn this down, if I had 4 or 5 different things going, it would turn it all down. So before you start mixing your monitors, you want to make sure that this is at unity, that your master output's at unity. And then you start doing what you need to do to get sound to wherever you need it to go. Okay? So you want to make sure that that's set, just like you have to set this. You kind of want to have these set at unity before you start doing your mixes here. Okay? So practicality for you guys is when we're diagnosing problems, remember that signal flow doesn't change. We started at the Aux Send, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to check to make sure that you have input. If you have input coming in, you're good. Go straight from there, and now your signal flow works the same. You either have to have an amp, you got to have either a powered speaker, an amp. You may have an EQ in between, because I could easily take, if I had just an amplifier in between these, I can put an EQ right in between there. So your signal flow essentially starts the same way. Because a lot of times I'll go into places and just the monitors won't work. And I don't just, forget everything I've learned. I say, okay, well, let me make sure the microphone input's good. All right, that's good. Now let me work from the Aux Send and check all the cables and start down my path. Okay? So just remember that it works the same. All right, another huge thing that we want to talk about, and this will be probably the last thing. Auxiliary sends are either pre or they are post. This is huge. Huge, huge, huge. There's usually a little button somewhere where you can select pre or post. All right. So if I look at the mixer, I can see that it has a little button there that says pre and post. What does that mean? If I am in post, that means that whenever I move the fader for the output fader for the main house, I am also moving what's happening in those monitors. Okay, they're linked. They become one. If I turn it up in the main speakers, I'm turning it up in the auxiliaries. If I turn down the main speakers, I'm turning down in the monitors. Is that a good thing? Bad thing? What's y'all's thoughts?
Bad thing.
Bad thing?
Depend on the situation. I guess.
Okay. It does depend on the situation. When you're working with the situation we've been talking about, which is floor monitors, you always want to run them in pre. The opposite of that. What pre does is they're unlinked. So now what I do in the house is what I do in the house, and what I do in the auxiliary stays in the auxiliary. They have no connection to each other. So what that allows you to do is basically make them happy, and then I can mix the house however I want, and their speakers stay the same mix that they are. okay? That's primarily how you're going to be using auxiliaries. So if you see a monitor situation being used where they are in post as opposed to pre, you got to ask some questions and try to figure out why, or what was the logic, or did they just not have a clue what that button was. A lot of times, you go into a place and those will be randomly selected up and down. So when you hear people say, man, our mix sounds great one Sunday and then the next Sunday it's horrible. And then in the middle of service, you know, my keyboard gets twice as loud as it was. And the guy's like, I never touched your monitor mix. Guess what? If it was in post, when he moved that fader to turn it up and down in the house speakers, guess what? It was moving it in his monitors. But he's not moving the Aux Send, but it's linked, okay? So you want to live, typically when you're doing things like that, monitors, you want to live in the pre-mode. So you want to check that very closely, super closely. Same with digital mixers and analog. Typically on analog, it's just going to be a button, or it's going to be, a lot of mixers may have 4 auxiliaries that you can select. The last 2 may be post only. So you've got to know what you're dealing with. If 4 and 5 are post only, and I use that for my monitor mix, I'm making a bad mistake. I need to use that for something else.
I think Gene was telling us about that on the mixer in that orchestra room last week.
Yes.
So basically, the signal goes until that pre-post button, and then stops, or continues off there. It doesn't
Yeah.
go all the way down.
So the situation that we had there, did it have a switch on it? A pre and a post?
Yeah, a little.
Okay. So we wanted to run that pre, so that way we could mix what was sending to the kids separate than what we were mixing in that classroom. When it first started out, that wasn't engaged and it was in post. So then when he turned down the fader, you couldn't hear it sending to that video feed. So that's why when he released that and it separated the two, it worked. That's why you're right. You did hear that conversation last week. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And if somebody just happens to be pressing those buttons, you could be, half your stuff, you could be changing the fader and you're mixing their monitors. And you could be causing feedback because now it's way too loud, and you can, so you can create all kinds of issues. So you really want to be aware of that. So monitors, pre, most everything you're going to be doing, you're going to be pre. Why would you want post? Say for instance, I'm doing theatrical stuff, a theater, and I'm playing tracks for them to dance and sing to and all that stuff, and I want to do fade out stuff. I want to link that monitor. When I fade, I want that monitor to go out too, so it's not like that keeps playing while I'm trying to fade out the house. There's definitely some applications where you may want to do a post fade. Obviously, post, another reason is if I'm using this to use outside effects, then I want that to be post. So when I turn down the volume, it turns down the effects mix. You don't run into that as much nowadays, so I don't really beat up on it that much. Back in the day, huge deal, because you were using outside effects engines as opposed to ones that are just built into the stuff now. So primarily you're going to be in pre the most. My goal is, once we get through the mixer, we'll set this up, we'll do a couple monitor mixes, and we'll set up a couple microphones and let y'all kind of get a feel of mixing monitors. We'll just do it here. It's kind of weird because we'll have 2 people, we'll have 2 different monitor mixes, and then we'll be asking for things, and then y'all will be making the mix. What's I about to say? One thing I kind of jumped over, we'll go into it next week, but I didn't talk about snake cable, and I'd usually talk about that before I do this, so remind me to talk about that next week. I know most of y'all know what it is, but I want to give you a little bit more in depth on it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is a big, we're moving far down this mixer. Now you know how to set up the gain, you know what a high pass is, you know how to engage a pad, you know all about EQs and how to work your mid-range frequencies. You know what an auxiliary send is. You don't necessarily know how to use it yet until you get your hands on it, but it's pretty simple once you think about who's asking, what are they asking for, that kind of XY axis. we're moving, we're cruising. You know what pre and what post is. So next week we'll talk about groups, panning, channel assignments, a little bit more about PFL and stuff like that. So we'll be through with the channel at that point, and then we'll talk about some of the master stuff and plugging some other things up. All right.